Our aim is, of course, to convey a clear message to Russia, and that's exactly what we're doing, that if they use military force against Ukraine, it will have severe consequences. NATO allies are ready to impose heavy economic sanctions, political, financial sanctions. NATO provides support to Ukraine. We help Ukraine with modernizing their defense and security institutions, and NATO allies provide trainers, equipment. So Ukraine can also impose costs on Russia if they once again invade Ukraine. And then thirdly, and most importantly for NATO allies, is that of course we are also ready to step up, as we actually now do, our military presence in the eastern part of the alliance to prevent any misunderstanding or room for miscalculation about NATO's ability and readiness to protect and defend all allies.
I mean, if it has to be put to a vote among allies, are you confident? Do you know what that threshold is that would get all allies to agree to use that response force?
But we will never give any potential adversary the kind of the privilege of defining exactly the threshold. What we will do is that we will always be sure that we have the necessary forces in the right place at the right time to defend and protect all allies. And we have done that for more than 70 years. And the success of NATO, the strongest alliance in history, is that by standing together, based on the principle an attack on one ally will trigger the response from the whole alliance, one for all for one, we have been able to preserve peace. So first of all, because our main task is to protect 30 allies, 1 billion people, territory in North America and Europe, that's our core task, and we demonstrate once again our commitment and our readiness and the capabilities to defend and deter any attack against NATO allies. So I am absolutely certain that President Putin and Russia takes NATO very serious when it comes to our ability to protect and defend all allies, and we demonstrate that every day. When it comes to Ukraine, I'm absolutely certain that Russia understands that they will have to pay a high price. Because they, after they used force against Ukraine in 2014, we have imposed severe sanctions on Ukraine. We have stepped up our support on sanctions on Russia after the use of force against Ukraine. We have provided support to Ukraine, stepped up that, and we have increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. So if with battle groups and more military presence in the eastern part of the alliance for the first time in our history. So if Russia wants less NATO at its borders, they have actually achieved exactly the opposite. And if they use force again against Ukraine, they will achieve even more NATO at their borders.
I think that Kremlin decision makers, that means Putin in the first instance, understand that they face a potentially very serious reaction from the West, which will be quite damaging to Russia and to their own position. And their calculation as to the seriousness of the West, but especially of the United States, will be critical for any decision they make to send a new invasion force into Ukraine. There's a dispute about how important sanctions have been, but there's no doubt that sanctions have cost the Russian economy 1+% of GDP a year, and maybe double that if Anders Osland and Maria Snegovaya are right. There's no doubt that the demands Moscow is making in this current crisis call for removal of all NATO forces in the countries that joined NATO since the Cold War ended. But in fact, we are now talking about plussing up NATO forces on Russia's border. So if Moscow goes into Ukraine and finds it has another 10,000 or 20,000 NATO forces on its borders and NATO equipment, has their geopolitical position improved? Moscow also has to worry about what will be the reaction in Sweden and Finland Two countries which had no interest in joining NATO in the past, but now have a serious national conversation about it because they see Putin as a serial aggressor.
I think actually the statement doesn't really call to sort of condemn Ostpolitik as a historical phenomenon, because it was probably very well suited to the past situation when it was invented in the 1970s. It helped definitely to ease Germany, the divided nation, Eastern Germany and Western Germany, to sort of find a way to get along better and be represented jointly in the international arena and so on. So there was a rationale for Ostpolitik. But what we see now, and this is, I think, what our statement calls for, is not to use the past experience of Ostpolitik as a fig leaf to cover over the complete lack of realism and strategy in the face of a completely different current situation. So people look at this Ostpolitik as a nostalgic way of saying we never need to adapt our thinking to new realities. And this is really what's so mind-blowing about, in my personal view, about the Berlin's approach to Russia.